Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Anthrozoology Podcast. Today we are excited to welcome Dr. Madi Mañetto Quick, who completed her PhD research in the more than human worlds of farms and farm animal sanctuaries at Te Herenge Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Welcome, Madi. We are excited to talk to you over the next two episodes about your research. Maybe you can tell us a little bit first about yourself and how you came about choosing this research subject.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you. First of all, I could talk a little bit about my PhD, where I investigated the stories we tell about farmed animals, specifically researching the contexts of farms and farm animal sanctuaries. And I approach all of these topics as a designer, because I study at the School of Design Innovation in Wellington. And my interest in kind of more than human studies within design took a somewhat kind of unusual route in that I started design school thinking that because I was somewhat good at drawing, I would get a design job once I finished. But then in my final year of my undergraduate, I took a course in multi-species design. And then I finally understood why I was at design school, because I was starting to feel a little bit like I wasn't really sure what I was doing there. I wasn't so interested in designing products or kind of graphic design or anything like that. But then once my eyes were open to kind of anthrozoology, I was thinking, oh, this is why I'm here. And then I enrolled in a master's program, and I did a multi-species ethnography of a local pig farm and designed new narratives of farming with the farmer. And that was a really transformative experience, a really valuable experience. It changed who I was as a person and as a researcher. And that kind of led to my PhD, where I continued to explore the context of farms, but also included farmed animal sanctuaries to kind of look at how we live with farmed animals outside of farming. Yeah.
I was in your PhD today, and there's a lot of information in there, obviously, and a lot of it is new to me. And you talk about the interpretive framework that you created. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that fitted into the multi-species and bringing in more than human animals as well as human voices into the research?
So a big part of my PhD was analyzing narratives told about farmed animals, and I specifically looked at memoirs written by farmers and farm animal sanctuary owners. And I created the framework so that as I was analyzing these stories, I was paying attention to the non-human characters. So one of the aims for my thesis was to tell new stories that kind of equalized the more than human characters, so that instead of the ways we usually tell stories where humans are sort of at the top of the pyramid and everything is below, I wanted to look at stories and try and think about how we could create a more sort of circular tale where humans, animals, elements of the land are all kind of on an even keel, and that interpretive framework is really hitting at that. So I looked at the ways the farmers or the farm animal sanctuary owners told stories of kinship or care, how the non-human animal characters were brought into the story, how the land was brought into the story. And then I used that framework to also analyze the new stories that I told at the end of my thesis. So it was really a way to kind of bring a new interpretive framework into the equation, and also to keep myself kind of responsible for telling stories that actually could kind of meet parts of the framework. So sort of holding myself accountable as well.
Yeah, so I read a little bit about what you were saying about your MA project changing you as a person. And I read in your article, which is about to come out, that you had changed from vegetarian to veganism during that journey. But you also say in your PhD that you try to stay with the struggle. You try and take a non-black and white path, a grey path. Can you explain a bit about how you decided that and why you decided it and why you didn't kind of go directly over to advocacy and have you reflected upon that, and is it something that's changing within you all the time?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it is something I think about every day. It's something that I committed to in my PhD really specifically was staying with the trouble, which is a term from Donna Haraway. She wrote a book, Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu. And that was something I kind of came to grips with during my master's research because I was a lot more black and white in my thinking of like, this is right and this is wrong, and these people are right and these people are wrong. And working with the farmer and kind of being accepted into his world so readily, it changed me a lot. And doing the field work as well, I think as an ethnographer, you kind of go into field site and come out slightly altered. And then I kind of in my own personal life became more black and white after my master's, in that I did switch from vegetarianism to veganism. So I was more kind of, for my values, for my actions to be in line with my values, I had to kind of forego animal products altogether as much as possible. But then in my PhD, I was only focusing on farm animal sanctuaries at the beginning because I only wanted to look at sites of where we live with animals outside of farming. But then as my research progressed and as I was investigating the worlds we make with farmed animals, I was realizing that there was a huge gap in that if I wanted to look at the worlds we make with farmed animals, I wanted to bring in farm contexts as well. So that was quite a big shift. And I was thinking, I'm a terrible vegan. I'm a terrible kind of researcher into animal advocacy. But then it was sitting with that discomfort and staying within the gray or staying with the trouble instead of kind of aligning myself with either side quite clearly. And a big part of that was also, sorry, one of my supervisors also worked in farmed animal contexts, and she actually has a small plot of land where she keeps her own sheep and she kills them sometimes for meat. But we always worked together so well, and it wasn't like our differences in viewpoints necessarily like needed to create any conflict or tension. In fact, it made me more critical and made me more creative. So I tried to bring that into my research as well.
So it made you more critical of of what exactly, of what aspect?
I think just that she had different ideas to me and different perspectives on how we make worlds with farmed animals, but at the core, we agreed on so many things. Like she talked about being able to kill an animal and also to love an animal. And it was sitting with those ideas and figuring out my own perspective, but also how to present research in a way that wasn't just kind of siloing off into one or the other, but making space for a world where many worlds fit.
So was that also in order to give more people access to your research, in terms of some people maybe wouldn't have picked it up if it was all about farming, some people wouldn't have picked it up if it was all about animal advocacy. So I guess there's more of an invitation there to various people who are thinking about going from one space to another. That's really interesting, actually. And
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, and even kind of how to bridge divergent worlds and try and kind of present a way of critically engaging with different various viewpoints, um, and taking pieces from each of them to develop something new or to tell new stories. Yeah.
I came across a phrase you had in there, necro care. I'd never heard of that before. Can you and that relates a little bit to what we excuse me just talking about. Could you talk a little bit about necro care for our listeners and also how it fitted into your research? Thanks.
So necrocare is a term that I took from Elon Abril's work. He's done extensive work on farm animal sanctuaries and wrote a book called Saving Animals. And necrocare is a term used to describe when a farm animal sanctuary owner or worker has to kill one of their animals in order to care for them if they're in too much pain or if they're seriously unwell, which is something anyone who's had an animal companion has probably experienced, with beloved pets. In my case, the best way of caring for an animal is sometimes to see it to the end of its life. And in farm animal sanctuaries, that's something that happens a lot because the animals there are aging or they have illnesses from their previous contexts within farms. So that's a term where it kind of positions killing as an act of care.
So I also read that the sanctuary staff managers, owners, who I don't know who specifically who was, actually made the decision to kill a wild boar to protect the residents. That seemed quite controversial and contradictory to my mind. How did you deal with that, and what was the reasoning behind that?
I think that's almost, I've never thought about it this way, but it's another instance of someone in my research staying within the grey, which was the sanctuary owner, where she had to do a number of things that were quite against her ethics and her values as a person. But in order to care for the kind of animal residents that she had taken responsibility for, she had to have a kind of external non-human animal killed because they would have injured one of the animals at the sanctuary. So yeah, she talked about that as a struggle, like it's something that wasn't easy for her, and that she employed a kind of hunter to kill the animal, and that she kind of watched the entire time as like, this is my responsibility to see this animal to the end of its life, even though it's been my decision to have it kind of, yeah, put down. But there were a number of kind of struggles like that for the sanctuary owner in keeping a kind of multi-species multi-species space where she also had a number of dogs and kind of animals that do not like dogs so much. So keeping that balance of kind of interspecies relationships as kind of careful and comfortable was something that was also very difficult.
I think that all reflects back on, Van Doren's idea of violent care and how anytime we're trying to sort of save one individual or one species, we end up having to harm others, whether it's to feed that particular endangered species, if it's a carnivore, or if it's, again, taking care of a potential predator. So I think it's a really, important theme in anthrozoology, that living with that sort of discomfort of acknowledging that we have to deal with violent care. I had not heard it called necro care either. That's very interesting.
In fact, I thought it was something slightly different, but it makes complete sense the way that you explained it. I thought it was about also killing animals to be food for the animals that were then in the sanctuary, which is, of course, is something that anybody who has decided not to try not to harm animals, but has a companion animal that is an obligate carnivore, struggles with a lot. So yeah, I thought, does it cover that at all, or is it just like the end of life care for? Does that term just about the end of life care for sanctuary animals?
Yeah, for the most part, I've seen it used for sanctuary animals just because I've only seen it used in the context. I've only used it myself in the context of farmed animals because and most farmed animals are not obligate carnivores. I'm trying to think of one that isn't. So yeah, I think that Elon Abrell has done work in other sanctuaries, so he might have used it in that way as well. And I haven't come across that. Yeah.
Yeah, because as you say, farmed sanctuary animals are generally herbivorous or omnivorous, aren't they? So I'm specifically thinking about cats in terms of companion animals, but yeah, necrocare, very interesting term that. So I did just have an idea and it's just escaped me. Oh yes. So you decided to use thematic analysis and you came up with various themes. I wondered if you could talk a little bit through for our listeners about how you came to the themes that you chose. Were there other themes that you didn't include in your thesis that you might try and pick up later? Yeah, because you read eight sanctuary books, and I'm not sure how many farming books you read, but a similar number. So yeah, how did you pick the themes out? Was it something you already had in your mind, or was it something that did you literally, coding can be quite tedious, can't it? Were there things that jumped out to you, for example?
Yeah, for the most part, there were things that jumped out to me as I read the memoirs kind of over and over again. They emerged as I was reading them, and I was developing the framework alongside this process. So the framework also kind of called certain things to attention. I think if I hadn't created the framework, I wouldn't have noticed the depictions of land or landscape in farm and farm animal sanctuary memoirs. So I talk about how the land can be a sort of backdrop to human activity in these stories, but also a very potent character at times, especially in the farm memoirs, with weather making a huge impact on the productivity of the farms. I also looked at different ways of killing in farms and farm animal sanctuaries and the ways death is present in both in very different ways. Also, the depiction of farmed animals as kind of individuals or as part of the masses within their species. I do think there are things that I have left out, especially reflecting on it and also reflecting on the feedback from my examiners for my thesis, in that they recognized that I left out I left out any depictions of farming in the global south. All of the farms were either based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, or the US. So I think paying special attention to including farm memoirs outside of that would be something I'd be interested in. Also, I didn't do a visual analysis of the memoirs, which as a designer is something that I've been lingering on, is analyzing the actual book covers of the memoirs, because those are quite interesting. And even comparing sanctuary memoirs to farm memoirs, they're quite different, the ones I read, in terms of what they put on their covers. Sanctuary owners often depict themselves on the cover with an animal quite close up, whereas farm memoirs have kind of more like vistas in the background. So yeah, that would be something I would be interested in pursuing further.
And that kind of vista is like the rural idyll you were talking about, the romanticized idea of, I guess, both farming and farm sanctuaries. They both have an idea, a utopian idea of the landscape. Yeah, which makes me think in a way that I don't know if of course, necro care wouldn't apply to the landscape, but the landscape has also changed, and parts of it killed, I guess, for keeping either sanctuary animals or farmed animals. So coming back to your design, I've got to say that I've been very jealous the last couple of days, because we had an interview yesterday with Irina Frazin, who is an amazing artist. And I was looking at your watercolors. Absolutely, I really love them. You're so talented. I'd like to have some pictures of my own, but I just can't draw like that at all. So did you find it kind of therapeutic as well to sit with the animals while you were drawing them? And was it a way to kind of have a conversation with the animals while you were sitting there drawing, or did you draw them afterwards from a photograph? How did that work?
For the most part, I drew them afterwards, just because, yeah, there wasn't loads of downtime at the sanctuary. And I was usually in any downtime just scribbling down loads of notes. So I would, after my time at the sanctuary, I would sit in my house, which has a really nice view over Wellington, and I would paint the animals from photos. And it was actually a really nice way of bringing me back to the field site, because once you're sort of removed from that more rural context and back in the city, it's easy to forget how it feels to be out in the fields. So as a way of kind of knowing the animals again. And I've always sort of painted since I was a child, and painting an animal, you really get to know them. Like, I've painted my dogs before, and you notice little marks on their faces, expressions that they have, the way their head turns into their body, and a certain curve that you might not notice if you're actually kind of trying to visualize them. So it was a nice way of sort of visually knowing the animals after being embodied with them in the field site.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our special guest, Dr. Madi Mañetto Quick. Please join us next time, where we will continue our conversation with Dr. Madi.